everyone, welcome back to the Zach GP channel, and in today's episode I have another F1 Fantasy post FP2 final thoughts video coming out for you. Now, like always in all of these videos, I'm going to be giving some hard and fast information after we have been given the best data possible ahead of the Saturday sessions of FP3 and qualifying, of course, before the deadline. Now, as per usual, heading into this video, to my left or to my right, depending on how it works on the editing, you will see a little table going in a cycle showing all of the A tier and B tier drivers and constructors points needed to go up in budget. So keep an eye on this because it's very much useful for building your teams, especially ones that are still building budget. But without any more shenanigans, let's get straight into the video, and make sure to like and subscribe if you like what you see. But straight away, let's start off with Zach's do's and don'ts for the tier list. Now remember, if I do not mention a driver or constructor, that means you do not bring them into your team. Now, heading into the first selections of the A tier drivers, and there is still a clear-cut first choice driver heading into most race weekends now, and it is Oscar Piastri. He looks the best on budget A tier driver wise, and even after practice, which was a bit up and down for Piastri, well, all of McLaren, at the end of the day, they still showed that they had the pace because they were setting good laps and then pitting. So even though practice didn't go smoothly for McLaren, I still think Piastri probably still is the best easy option for a 2 times. But I guess it doesn't stop there as well, because he also is under investigation for yellow flag infringements. So keep an eye on that, because in actual F1 fantasy terms, that could be helpful for us, because if he qualifies 2nd or 3rd, and then he has like a 3-place grid penalty and he's down to 6th, that's extra overtaking points to where he would normally finish in a 2nd or potentially still 1st from that point. But just keep an eye on all of that stuff heading into the Saturday. It's going to get a little bit crazy if Piastri does get this. Then heading into the final big 2 times option you can use would be Lando Norris as a differential. But remember, with Lando Norris, it's sort of the case of if you have around 110 to 120 million, you can't get to those 4A builds in time for the end of the season, then you want to go for a differential to try to compete with the 4A builds. By all means necessary, then you could go over to Lando Norris. Now again, to reiterate, with Norris, it didn't go smoothly in FP2 as well, but again, similar to Piastri, we did see they do have the pace. So definitely come into FP3 and quali, they'll be back at it. However, Norris just needs to keep it out of the wall this time. Then heading into options where you can use them alongside the McLaren duo, it would have to be Charles Leclerc up top. He didn't look too shabby in the practice sessions so far, and in that Ferrari, he always gets pole position here, and he has been 3rd place in F1 Fantasy points-wise in 2023 and 2024 here. And then a little quick note on Lewis Hamilton, as again, he was fastest in FP2. However, he was on the mediums compared to everyone on the softs, and it looks like potentially the mediums might be faster this weekend than the actual softs. So that's the reason for his pace. So you can use him. However, from the looks of things, from Leclerc's pace, it looks like he would be the better Ferrari to use there. Then you also have Max Verstappen, Magic Max, anything can happen like in Monza. And finally, if you're going on the cheap alternative side where you don't have enough money for Leclerc or Verstappen, then you can go with someone like George Russell. Now, heading into the A tier constructors, you can use Slack Bang as normal. McLaren, do I need to say more? For once, probably yes, actually, because they didn't have a good FP2. But like I said with Piastri and Norris, we know they do have the pace. They were doing some weird runs where they weren't actually setting their fastest laps when they got to the end of it. They were then going into the pits, and both of them hit the wall in FP2. So there are a little few worries around McLaren, but at the end of the day, they still look like the fastest team, and I wouldn't be surprised heading into FP3 and quali if that's exactly what was shown as well. And then the best one to pair alongside them looks like Ferrari. Again, Ferrari always tend to do well here in Baku. After practice, they look pretty decent here as well. And from what we've seen with Red Bull and Mercedes so far pace-wise, it just looks like Ferrari has the edge over them. However, again, especially looking at teams who have just come into F1 Fantasy around the low 100 million side, if you physically cannot afford to have minimum Piastri, McLaren, Ferrari, then that's where you potentially look at Piastri, McLaren, Mercedes, but only as a cheap alternative. Realistically, Ferrari still look like the better option. Then heading into B tier drivers, and we'll start off with the first list as I usually do now with these videos, which is the budget options. So heading into this race weekend, if you're looking purely at budget, the drivers you really want to be looking at will be Isaac Hadjar, who is a must-have on everyone's team for clear-cut budget gains. Then Ollie Bearman, he tends to score pretty well as well in F1 Fantasy from time to time, plus he's pretty good at overtaking. Then you also have Alex Albon. And finally, of the last true budget options, you then have Bortoleto. And then finally, in their own little bracket of budgeting options, you also have Colapinto and Gasly for the exact same reasons of being on the price floor. However, realistically, both the Alpine duo don't look fantastic on points. So if you're going for one of these drivers, I think my top choice would be Colapinto purely for needing less points to go up that 0.6 million than Gasly. Now, points-wise for the B tier drivers, it actually looks like the Haas duo have a pretty good car behind them right now. Actually, all the Ferrari-powered cars actually look pretty damn good. So you could, if you're going for those differential builds, head over to someone like an Esteban Ocon if you need just points and you're no longer going for budget. However, a great option now for both budget and points is Ollie Bearman. He looks like one of the best picks this weekend now after FP2. And it's basically the same thing for the next two duos I'm talking about, and that's the Williams duo and the Racing Bulls duos. So the likes of Isaac Hadjar and Alex Albon now become great assets for budget and for points. And then you also have the differentials of Carlos Sainz and Liam Lawson, who don't look too good on the budget. However, from what they've shown in FP2, they could score points. However, this weekend now, it looks like those three teams are the top picks that you want to be getting your B tier drivers from. And that actually brings me over to the B tier constructors, and it's a similar situation there. It now looks like if you want to go for a B tier constructor team, it would be with Haas, then potentially with a Racing Bulls, and then with Williams. However, again, it still looks like the differential pick, as Ferrari and Mercedes looked clearly faster than all of those teams, and even when McLaren can get their act together, they will be faster as well. So again, it will be a differential pick, and I don't think it will get any more points this race weekend. However, they are there for if you want to use them. Now, finally, before we talk about the team selections, let's head over to your chips that you can use, and straight away, as per usual, heading into a race weekend now, especially in the second half of the season, if you have Limitless, you have to get it used. Now again, I'll go through my Limitless team in the team selections. However, basically it diminishes in value the better every other team gets, the more budget everyone has. Just use it when you can, and Baku's not a half decent track to use it on. Then you can also use wildcard, especially if you're someone who was using a Williams build last weekend, or you're finally moving over to your final foray builds this weekend. It'd be a great time to use a wildcard. And finally, as always, keep an eye on Final Fix. I usually will mention something about Final Fix on Twitter if anything crazy does happen, but like last year, Norris and Hamilton started quite near the back of the grid last season. If anything like that happens, might be worth looking into a Final Fix. Now, finally, the best part of the video, the team selection. Now, we'll start off the 4A light teams, where realistically the highest budget it can go is 123.4. And the reason I start with this is because from this team downwards, you can pretty much get all the way back down to those 100 million teams ready for anyone who's fresh to F1 Fantasy. But straight away, the best team for the 4A lights would have to be Piastri, Albon, Bearman, Hadjar, Bortoleto, McLaren and Ferrari. Like I've mentioned throughout this entire video, Albon great for budget and points, Bearman the same, Hadjar the same and Bortoleto the same. Those four are probably the best 4 points and budget heading into this race weekend. You'd love to have them in your team. With Piastri, realistically, Piastri would be the one that you would put 2 times on with McLaren and Ferrari. Clear cut first and second best constructor. However, if you cannot afford this, then just follow my steps down. First of all, I would look at getting rid of Bortoleto down to Colapinto for 122.2 million. Then I'd drop 1 million down from Bearman to Bortoleto for 121.2 million. And then finally, for the 4A light teams, I would then go Bortoleto to Gasly as your final last choice option. As funnily enough, both the Alpine drivers, they don't look fantastic budget-wise and points-wise. However, they won't go down in value, meaning they are quite easy assets to hold this race weekend. And realistically, as you can see, Hadjar is the clear must-have in these teams. I wouldn't go anywhere near these teams without Isaac Hadjar. However, this is where it gets interesting, because you could then revert back to what we were actually having and then focus on actually just getting rid of Albon instead. And this would free up a lot of that room to then look into the Piastri, McLaren, Ferrari teams for anyone who can't afford any of those teams at 120 million. So first off, you could go Albon down to Alonso for 118.9. Again, very much in that range of you're going to be struggling to get to those 4A builds before the end of the season. So you go all out on points. Fernando Alonso looks good on that, but if you want to still go down, potentially because you can't afford it, or you want to look at a budget option, then you could go from Alonso to Lawson. Again, Lawson's a half decent budget option. Again, not great on the points though. And then finally, that's when you'd have a look going down to Colapinto from Lawson for 115.5. And then you basically do the exact same process we did last time round, but without Colapinto, with Gasly instead, with the rest of the drivers, where you could go Behrman down to Gasly, Bortoleto down to Lawson, and then Lawson down to Carlos Sainz. And then this is where we would get into those very cheap teams where then you could potentially have a look at dropping to Mercedes, but realistically only if you're really, really struggling on budget and you have to drop down to these cheaper teams. Now, finally heading into the juicy team selections on the 4A builds, the big budget teams pushing in Baku. And as you can see on my screen, we are going to be starting off with the highest budget team possible. This would set you back 134.3 million. So again, if you have this money, 100% go for it. Again, Behrman, Hadjar and Bortoleto, the three best options B-tier driver-wise on the best budget teams, with McLaren and Ferrari and Charles Leclerc as the pairing with Oscar Piastri. Again, Charles Leclerc always looks good at Baku. There's no reason to try not to have him in your team this race weekend. But then again, follow me down to these different team values if you can't afford this and see which one works with you and then pick that one. You could go Bortoleto to Colapinto for 133.1, Hadjar to Colapinto for 132.5, or Behrman down to Colapinto for 132.1. Then if you need to bring in double Alpine, then you could look at the likes of Colapinto, Gasly, Hadjar with the rest of the team, which is the best option for the Alpine duo selection at 130.9. And if you still need a little bit more money, that's when you could remove Hadjar and then bring in Bortoleto to get it down to 130.3. Then finally, if you still need a little bit more money, that's where I would have a look and then change Leclerc down to a Russell. Again, this would then cost you 129.6, and I'd only recommend doing down Leclerc to Russell once you get down to the Alpine duo. But realistically, this is as far down as I would go on the 4A builds. So if you couldn't afford something like this, I wouldn't really go near it. Potentially, you could risk it with a Lawson or a Sainz, but you're really risking not having any budget builders in this team if you go that route. Then finally, just showing off my limitless team for anyone who looks like they want to use this, it has Piastri as the two times with Lando Norris, Verstappen, Leclerc, Russell, McLaren and Ferrari. Basically the slap bang normal limitless teams for most options, where you have a little bit of everything with one Red Bull, one Ferrari, one Mercedes, the best of those. And then McLaren and Ferrari look the best constructors. Piastri looks good here again as the two times. He did well here last season as well. You could go for a differential if you want to go for a Norris two times, Leclerc two times, whatnot. However, the simple and best, probably consistent one would be the Piastri two times. But anyway, that is it for today's video post FP2 final thoughts. Now, as per usual, comment down below anything that you need help with your team on, and I will get down to the comments and I will try to answer all of your questions down below, as at the end of the day, this is what I'm here for. I'm trying to help all of you peeps as much as possible with your F1 Fantasy team selections heading into Baku. And as always, if you're still a little bit unsure heading into the qualifying deadline, then make sure to head over to the Fan App channel, where I will be live streaming an hour before with Terry and Adam, and we will be helping again everyone go through their team selections, our final thoughts after FP3, and just the overall team selections for ourselves as well. However, thank you all so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. I hope you really enjoyed this video and it helped you out with your F1 Fantasy teams. I'll see you all very soon. Take care.